What's up everyone, Patrick here, welcome back. And in this next video, what we are given is a triangle that has vertices A, which is at coordinate -4 and 0, vertice B, 6 and -2, and then C at 3 and 8. And then we have to find the median from vertex A, B, and C. Now, with a question like this, if they give you some kind of shape with coordinates, I recommend drawing out the shape. It doesn't have to be necessarily to scale, just a rough drawing, just because it's going to give you a nice visual of the direction in which you're going to be heading, and then you could sort of check your answers, check some steps on the way, and see if it makes sense with your diagram. So starting with -4 and 0, where's that going to be? That's going to be like over here, right? An x value of -4, a y value of 0. So this is like vertex A. Let's label it. And then we'll have 6 and -2. So an x value of 6 and then a y value of -2. So that's going to be like over here. So this is going to be like point B. And then point C, 3 and 8, that's going to be like here. 8's like up here. Like that. Right? And so if we join these vertices, that's the triangle that we're dealing with. Now, if you graph this on graph paper, it's going to be nice too, because one of the steps in finding a median is we're going to have to find midpoints. And actually on graph paper, you can find the exact midpoint, but you have to be able to do it algebraically as well, right? So that's why I recommend, even if you don't have graph paper, just drawing out a rough diagram like this, because you're going to have to find it algebraically anyways. So first question is find the equation of the median from vertex A. Now, just not to mess up this diagram too much, let me draw out another, sorry, I didn't label this. So we'll have A, B, and C. Now, when they're asking for the median from vertex A, what they're asking for is from vertex A, we have to draw a line to the midpoint of the opposite side. So notice from vertex A, the opposite side is this one, and so the midpoint is going to be like over here. So that is the median from vertex A. And then when we find the median from vertex B, it's going to be from B to the midpoint of the opposite side, from C to the midpoint of the opposite side. Okay, so that's basically what is happening. Now, the first step is we want to find out what is the midpoint between C and B, because once we have the midpoint between C and B, that's going to be some kind of coordinate. We have this coordinate of A, which is -4 and 0. Two coordinates, we can then find the equation of the line. The median is going to be a line, so it's going to end up being in y equals mx plus b form. We could also put it in standard form at the end as well, just in case maybe solutions in your textbook give different formats or the teacher asks you for a different format, so we'll go over that as well. But that's basically what's happening. So the first step in this case is to find the midpoint of C and B. So what do we do? You know what, let me actually write out these coordinates on this diagram, just because we're going to be referring to them a lot, like that. So the midpoint between C and B, how do we do that? Well, we add up the x values, so we'll have 3 plus 6 divided by 2. Then add up the y values, 8 plus -2 divided by 2. Like that. So then 3 plus 6 gives us 9. That's going to end up being 9 over 2. 8 plus -2, that's like 8 minus 2, which ends up being 6. 6 divided by 2 gives us 3. Like that. So now we find, step 2 is find the median. Or if you want to generalize it, we can find the equation of the line between the 2 points, -4 and 0, and 9/2 and 3. Right? If you got that kind of question, it would be the exact same thing. Now, also, one more thing to note is that this 9/2, when you have your diagram, this 9/2 and 3, you could check, does it make sense in the diagram? And notice 9/2, that's 4.5. So we know the midpoint's going to be around here. So notice 4.5 is between 3 and 6, between those x values. So it makes sense that 4.5 is going to be here on the diagram. Then the y value of 3, that makes sense as well. If this is 8, this is going to be 3 around. Again, it's not to scale in this case. If you had graphing paper, it would be to scale. But you could just do a rough check. So for example, if you end up getting like -9/2 and 3, well, -9/2 would have an x value of -4.5, which would be like over here. And then just on your diagram, you would know that doesn't make sense, and then you can go back and check your work. That's why a diagram like this is a nice check for steps on the way to the final answer. So finding the equation of the line between those 2 points, first step is finding the slope. So if we label this x1, y1, x2, y2, like that. It doesn't matter, you could do this x2, y2, this be x1, y1. Doesn't matter, you're going to end up getting the same slope anyway. Now, the slope in general is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So what we would do is we would have 3 y2 minus y1, which is 3 minus 0, over x2, 9/2, minus -4. Be careful with your signs over here, right? We're subtracting a negative like that, so make sure you put that negative in brackets. Again, if you had this be x2, y2, this would be x1, y1, well, you could switch it up. You could have 0 minus 3 over -4 minus 9/2. And then once you simplify this over here, certain signs would cancel out in a certain way. You'd end up getting the exact same answer that you're going to get here. So again, it doesn't matter which one you label over here. If you simplify this, if you simplify this, you should get the exact same answer. So from here, what we would do is we'll have 3 minus 0, which is 3 all over 9/2 plus 4. Negative, negative, turn into a positive. Now, when I get fractions like this within a fraction, what I like to do is do work on the side and not do too much over here, because then it starts getting messy potentially. The chance of making a mistake goes up. So what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to work with the 9/2 plus 4 on the side. So this is like 4/1. Getting a common denominator, multiply this by 2, multiply this by 2, so it'd be 9/2 plus 8/2, which would give us 17/2. So we end up having, let me write it over here actually. Sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place. Hopefully on your paper you're going in a certain, and organizing it in a certain order. So 3/17/2, that could be like your next line over here, right? This denominator simplifies to 17/2. So this is going to be like 3/1 divided by 17/2. Whenever I get something like this where I have a fraction and then fractions within that, if I have a number in the numerator or the denominator, I put that number over 1. So then it's obvious that we're taking a fraction, dividing it by another fraction. So we can rewrite this as 3/1 divided by 17/2, like that. This and this are the exact same thing. And then notice that this would be 3/1 times 2/17, like that. Right, we flip the second fraction. Now 3 times 2 is 6, 1 times 17 is 17. And then that doesn't simplify any further. So this right there ends up being the slope of that first median. Okay, so the slope in this case is 6 over 17. So what's left to do now is we have to find the b value, right? Because remember, we're finding the equation of a line. And so we have y equals 6 over 17x plus b, like that. And so we can use either this point or this point to plug in for x and y to solve for that b value. It doesn't matter which one, you're going to get the same answer, but I feel like this one is going to be easier to work with, right? Whenever I see a 0, I try to use that if possible. So 0 goes in for y, then we'll have 6 over 17 times -4, and that's going to be plus b. Okay, so continuing this over here, I'll have 0 equals, now 6 times -4, this -4 is like over 1, so 6 times -4 is -24. 17 times 1 is over 17, then we have a plus b. Then to isolate for this plus b, let's bring the -24 over 17 over, like that. So that ends up being the b value. So the final equation of the line, this ends up being 24 over. So that right there actually ends up being the final answer. That ends up being the equation of the median from vertex A. Now, a couple of things I want to make a note of over here. Let me write this. So we have y equals 6 over 17x plus 24 over 17. Now, first thing, the way I found this b value, you may have a different method in finding it. A common other method is using y minus y1 equals m bracket x minus x1. You may be taught this method in class, but it would give you the exact same answer. So let me show you. If we have 6 over 17 for the slope, we'll have x minus. Now again, we can use either point. I'm going to use the -4 and 0. We can use that midpoint we found or the -4 and 0. I'm going to use this. So we'll have x minus -4. And then we'll have y minus 0, like that. So what happens here, y minus 0 is just y. We'll have 6 over 17, x plus 4. And then we can distribute this in the bracket. So 6 over 17 times x is 6 over 17x. 6 over 17 times 4 over 1, 4 times 6 gives us 24. 1 times 17 gives us 17. Notice the exact same line. Now, if this wasn't a 0, let's say this was some kind of other number, you'd have to distribute this, then you'd have to bring this number over and then simplify those two numbers to get the b value. Okay, so this is another method that you may be shown in class to get the exact same equation. Again, personally, I don't like using this. What I do is I get the slope, put it into this, and then I just plug in a y value and an x value from one of the points, and then just isolate for that b. I feel like there's just less algebra to do in that method. But again, this is another method that also works. Another thing I want to mention is that this line here, it's in y equals mx plus b form. So a lot of times you'll see lines given in standard form as solutions. So if we put this in standard form, what we got to do is we got to get rid of the fractions. So this y is like over 1. And the way you get rid of fractions is you got to multiply all the expressions by the lowest common denominator. So the lowest common denominator between 1, 17, and 17 is 17. So we'd multiply this by 17, multiply this by 17, multiply this by 17. All the expressions on the left side and on the right side get multiplied by that same value. Right? Because if this side equals this side, well, if we multiply this whole side by something and then multiply the right side by that same thing, both sides are still going to be equal. That's why we can do something like that when we have an equation. So 17 over 1 is 17 times y gives us 17y. 6 over 17 times 17, notice the 17s would cancel out, so we'd end up with a 6, and then we have the x there. The 17s cancel out here, and then we have a 24. And then in standard form, the value in front of the x has to be positive. You want to bring this over, so we'd have a 0 left, so we'd have 6x. Then comes the value that has the y, or the expression that has the y attached. So this was a positive 17y, bring it over, it becomes a minus 17y plus 24. Okay, so that's another way you can represent that line, that median that we just found. So this was one way, the y equals mx plus b form, but the solution may also be given in this format, right? So for all of these, I'll give you both formats, right? So that's the answer to part A. Now with part B, we're finding the median from vertex B to the midpoint of the opposite side, which is going to be like over here around, right? So what's the first step? Well, we got to find the midpoint between A and C. So the way we would do that is we would add the x values, so -4 plus 3, and then divided by 2. And then add the y values, we'll have 0 plus 8, and then we're going to divide by 2, like that. So this would end up being what? -4 plus 3 is -1. That's going to be over 2. That can't simplify any further. 0 plus 8 is 8. Divided by 2 gives us 4. Right, so this midpoint here ends up being -1 over 2 and 4. Notice it makes sense on the diagram as well, right? -1 over 2 and then 4. It makes sense that it's going to be in that area. So now we have the midpoint. We got to find the equation of that line right there. So we'd find the equation between this point, 6 and -2, and then this point, -1 over 2. And 4, like that. Okay, so now to find the equation of a line that goes through those 2 points, first step, maybe you want to label these like x1, y1, x2, y2. We do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we'll have 4 minus -2. Careful when you're minusing a negative, put that in brackets. Then we'll have -1 over 2 minus 6, like that. And then from here, 4 minus -2 is like 4 plus 2. And then this I'm just going to keep as is for now. So this ends up simplifying to 6 over -1 over 2 minus 6. And then as I mentioned before, if I get something like this, where I got fractions within fractions, it's -1 over 2 within that, I like to work with this separately on this side just to not make things messy. So we'll have -1 over 2, this is like over 1, common denominator. Right, and then -1 minus 12 gives us -13. That's going to be over 2. So this denominator simplifies to -13 over 2. And then that fraction doesn't simplify any further. So we'd end up having 6 over -13 over 2. Now again, whenever I have something like this and I have a number, just to make it a little more consistent, I like to put the number over 1. So it's like a fraction divided by a fraction. So we could rewrite this as 6 over 1 divided by -13 over 2. Right? Doing these kinds of steps, not rushing too much, it really does minimize the chances for a mistake. And then in the long run, it ends up saving you time because then you don't have to go back and check your answer too much. And if you do have to go back, you have more steps to check it, so it's easier to find the mistake if you do make one. So from here, a fraction divided by a fraction, we keep this fraction the same, multiplying it by 2 over negative 13. This negative, doesn't matter if it's in the denominator or numerator. Let's just keep it up there. This would end up being negative 12 over 13, like that. And then that doesn't simplify any further. So this ends up being the slope of this line. And it makes sense. Notice that this is a negative slope. Well, notice that this line, it has a negative slope, right? It's sloped downward. So that's another check that you could do. In addition to the midpoint, you could see what's the value, what's the sign of the slope, and then check if it makes sense on your diagram, and it does in this case. So negative 12 over 13 ends up being the slope. So let's write that over here. Okay, and then from here, we solve for that b value, whichever way you want to do it. Just make sure that when you do solve for the b value, whichever way you're going to do it, you're getting the exact same solution I'm going to get. So we end up having that. And then we could pick one of these points to plug in for x and y. It doesn't matter. Because we're dealing with a fraction here, I'm going to use this point. So I'll put negative 2 equals negative 12 over 13 times 6. It doesn't matter what point you use. If you want extra practice, maybe with your algebra, after you finish this, after you write this down, maybe pause the video and try it with this point. See if you get the same b value. It should be the exact same. So from here, we'll have negative 2 equals, now negative 12 over 13 times 6 is like 6 over 1. Negative 12 times 6 gives us negative 72 over 13 plus b. Just be really careful with the algebra here when you're dealing with these kinds of fractions. Now this negative 2, we could put it like over 1 because we got to bring this over. So what's going to happen is we're going to end up with negative 2 over 1 plus 72 over 13. When we bring this over, it becomes a positive. The b value stays on the right side. We're isolating for the b value. Okay, let me actually write out the slope on the side here just so I don't forget it. Okay, so let me just do a quick check. Yeah, it looks all good to me. So from here, multiply this by 13, multiply this by 13. The lowest common denominator between 1 and 13 is 13. Negative 2 times 13 is negative 26 over 13 plus 72 over 13. This is the b value. And then negative 26 plus 72, that gives us positive 46. And then it's going to be over 13. That ends up being the b value right there. That doesn't simplify any further, 46 over 13. So what's the final line? What's the equation of the final line? We'll have y equals negative 12 over 13x plus 46 over 13, like that. So that ends up being the median for part B. Now if you want to put it in standard form, like we did before, the y is over 1, what's the common denominator between these? 13. Multiply this by 13, multiply this by 13, multiply this by 13. So we'd end up with 13y equals, 13's cancel out, so we just have negative 12x. 13's cancel out, we got 46. Now, remember standard form has to be ax plus by plus c is equal to 0 for a line, and then this a value has to be positive. So notice this is negative here, so we bring everything over to the left side in this case. Before, in part A, it was positive here, so we brought everything to the right side. So it really depends on this. So bringing this over, we'll have positive 12x. This stayed here, so that was positive 13y. This comes over, so it's minus 46 equals 0. So that's the standard form line. Right, so the solutions may give you either this or this. You got to be able to go from one to the other, right? Either this form, y equals mx plus b form, or this form, standard form. Right, so now with part C, actually what I recommend doing is maybe pausing the video right now and then trying part C yourself with the steps that we followed. See if you get the same answer. And then maybe watch the video after and then compare your way to my way. If you're getting the same answer, then maybe you have your own unique way that you prefer to do it. Just make sure you're getting the same answer. So the median from vertex C, let's erase this other median so there's not too much going on here. So the median from vertex C is going to be from here to the midpoint between between point A and point B. So that's going to be like over here, let's say. So that's the median right there. That's the equation that we got to find, the equation of that line. So first thing, we find the midpoint between A and B. We got to find this point first. So to do that, we would add the x values. So we'd have negative 4 plus 6, that's going to be over 2. Then we'll have 0 plus negative 2. That's going to be over 2. Negative 4 plus 6 gives us 2. 0 plus negative 2, that's like 0 minus 2. Negative 2 over 2. This ends up being 1 and negative 1. And notice, makes sense. With our diagram, 1, negative 1, that's approximately the area right there. Okay, so from, actually give me a sec here. Yeah, 1 and negative 1 is the midpoint. Right, so 1 and negative 1, what's nice about this is we don't have fractions here to deal with between these points, so the algebra should go a little bit smoother. Now we have to find the equation of the line between these 2 points here. So first step, find the slope, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. This is x1, y1, x2, y2. So we'll have 8 minus negative 1 over 3 minus 1, like that. 8 minus negative 1 is like 8 plus 1, right? These turn into a positive. 2 negatives turn into a positive. 8 plus 1 is 9. 3 minus 1 is 2. So 9 over 2 ends up being the slope. And this is actually a nice example to show that, let's say we let this be x2, y2, and then this was x1, y1. What would happen? Well, we would have negative 1 minus 8, right? y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, like that. This would be negative 9 over negative 2. Notice the negatives cancel out. We end up with positive 9 over 2. So whichever way you do it, same slope. So the slope, 9 over 2. Let's solve for that b value. So y equals 9 over 2x plus b. And then let's plug in one of these points. I'm going to use, we're going to get a fraction here either way. So just as a quick side note, when I'm thinking about what points to plug in, I look at the x value here and see, especially if the slope is a fraction, I see if I plug in this x value or this x value, will one of them cancel out with the 2, and then we can get maybe like a integer over here. But notice that if we put 3 here, 2 doesn't go into 3. If we put a 1 there, 2 doesn't go into 1. We're going to end up with a fraction either way. Right? So that's what I check for first. So we're going to end up with a fraction either way. I'm going to just use this point, so I'll put -1. Again, it doesn't matter. You should get, no matter what points you plug in at any time, you should get the same b value. Just kind of giving you on the way things that I personally think about. So -1 equals this times that is just that. Bring this over. So then this -1 is like over 1 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 2. To get a common denominator, we'll have -2 over 2 minus 9 over 2 equals b, -11 over 2. That ends up being the b value, right? So y equals 9 over 2x minus 11 over 2. That ends up being the answer to part C, y equals mx plus b form. If you want to put in standard form, multiply everything by the lowest common denominator, which is 2 in this case, so 2 times y is 2y. The 2's would cancel out, so we'd just have a 9x. The 2's would cancel out, so we'd have a minus 11. Now, it's not always going to be, just want to make a note here. Let's say we had y equals 9 over 4 x minus 11 over 2. What would be the lowest common denominator? 4. Multiply this by 4. Multiply that by 4. Multiply this by 4. So 11 times y is 11y. The 4's cancel out here. We'd have 9x. And over here, notice the 2 goes into the 4 twice. So we'd have to multiply the 11 by the 2. So we'd have minus 22. Just want to make a note of that because in all these examples, these just canceled out with what we multiplied, right? We multiplied this by 2, so the 2's canceled out, but it's not always going to be like that, right? Sometimes these denominators are going to be different, so when this goes into that, you're going to be left with something here. So just be careful, then you're going to have to take that and multiply it by that. So that's another thing I wanted to mention. And then from here, bring the y over, right? We want to have the coefficient in front of the x positive. That ends up being the answer. So the median for part C, either in y equals mx plus b form or in standard form.